56,250. Now this is a very important number. I want you to remember this number, and you'll be quizzed on this at the conclusion of the message this morning. In fact, I almost named my message 56,250. That's how important this number is. And the importance of this number begins with the words from Proverbs, which if you were eating a cookie and saw that just a second ago, as a dog returns to its vomit, so fools repeat their folly. This is a famous verse, and the writer of Proverbs uses an ugly and disgusting metaphor to remind us how foolish it is to repeat mistakes. And sadly, it is a perfect metaphor for the life of Samson. Fools repeat their mistakes. Samson repeated his mistakes. Over and over again, Samson sinned, asked God for forgiveness, and then made the same mistake again. He never learned. And by the way, the number 56,250 is not the number of mistakes Samson made. It is something else. Now, I began this series by naming Samson's problem the Samson sickness. Samson was destined for greatness. His birth sounds a lot like the birth of Jesus. An angel came to his mother, said that she would have a child. Samson's going to be the savior of the Israelite people. He is born as a Nazarite, a people set apart for the work of God. Nazarites were something special. It was a position where they were not a priest, but they were still given special rights when they made a vow to God. He makes 3 vows as a Nazarite. He will not get drunk. He violated that over and over again. He will not touch something dead or unclean. And last week, as we read about him touching the lion that he killed in the vineyard, we discovered he violated that one. And he will not cut his hair. 3 Nazarite vows. His long hair was an outward and visible symbol of his commitment to God. Much like baptism is for us, his hair was for him. But Samson let pride slip in. The Samson sickness is something we all suffer from at one time or another. It is when we begin to think we're too good to fail. It is when we think we have things handled because we are handling things ourselves. It's when we think we can do it on our own without God. Samson was called by God and set apart for a purpose. He was given supernatural strength. He was there to help deliver the Israelites from the Philistines. And the Philistines held the Israelites captive for many, many years. Israel at that time was ruled by what they called judges, not kings, but judges. And Samson would be Israel's next judge. Now, our first message was about attitudes that make great people weak. We focused specifically on the Samson sickness of pride. Last week, we turned to those moments when great people are brought down by emotion. And yet, we also said that Samson had 2 sides to his life. There were many good things he did, but they were offset so often by all the mistakes he made. As a dog returns to its vomit, so fools repeat their folly. So let's continue the story of Samson. Last week, he met a Philistine woman, and he fell in love, and he was set to be married to her. Of course, the Israelites were not supposed to have anything to do with the Philistines, and this was especially true of a Nazarite. But Samson thought he knew better. After losing a bet to the Philistines by trickery, Samson responded in anger. Samson said to them, "This time I have a right to get even with the Philistines. I will really harm them." So he went out and caught 300 foxes and tied them tail to tail in pairs. He then fastened a torch to every pair of tails, lit the torches, and let the foxes loose in the standing grain of the Philistines. He burned up the shocks and the standing grain together with the vineyards and olive groves. Samson said to them, "Since you've acted like this, I swear that I won't stop until I get my revenge on you." The Philistines responded by killing his former fiancée and her father. So this made Samson even angrier, and that's why he decided to get revenge on them. He attacked them viciously and slaughtered many of them. Then he went down and stayed in a cave in the rock of Etam. If you feel like the attacks are going back and forth, Samson gets revenge, then the Philistines get revenge, then Samson gets revenge, then the Philistines get revenge, you'd be right. Samson gets revenge on the Philistines, so they have to respond. Samson then responds, and it just keeps going on and on in this cycle, repeating over and over, which is a great metaphor for the life of Samson, repeating over and over. The Philistines are very angry at this point after the whole issue with the grain and the fact that he killed so many of them. So the Philistines say to the Israelites, "Get your leader, get that judge, and bring him to us so we can kill him." So the Israelites go to Samson. I can't imagine the discussion that went on here. "Samson, could you please come with us? We need to hand you over to the Philistines." These are his own people. And Samson actually worked out a deal. He said, "Well, if you promise that you won't kill me, I'll go with you." So they bound him up, and they all made the agreement. They bound him up, and he was off to see the Philistines. Well, that didn't work out exactly right, because when he got close enough where he was close to all the Philistines, he immediately started attacking them. He grabbed a donkey's jawbone, and he killed 1,000 Philistines with a single donkey's jawbone. Judges 15:16 said, "Then Samson said, 'With a donkey's jawbone I have made donkeys of them.'" And you can imagine in your own mind what he's really saying. "With a donkey's jawbone I have killed 1,000 men." This is the picture that we use as the theme for Samson, the donkey's jawbone. So if you're wondering where this picture comes from and what that's about, doesn't that make you even hungrier right now for a wonderful lunch? But that is what that is. He killed them with a donkey's jawbone. When Samson was in the will of God, his job was to save the Israelites from the Philistines. So this is one of those cases when he was accomplishing the task God called for, but it was the way he did it that was the problem. As we said last week, he was giving into his pride, and he was giving in to emotion. But then we have one of these verses that says so much in just a few words. Samson led Israel for 20 years in the days of the Philistines. Now it's easy to skip this verse. This verse doesn't seem to say a whole lot. We don't hear anything, except think about what it's saying. After stories of lions and vineyards and jawbones and marriages that didn't happen and honey and dead Philistines, this verse seems so what happened? 20 years and nothing happened. There's nothing to it. But in that short little verse, it says everything. For 20 years, there was peace. Things were fine. He obviously was leading and there were no issues. Samson was on track. He was in the will of God. We have no stories of the Samson sickness. He keeps his emotions in check. He is in the will of God for 20 years. That's a long time, especially when you consider everything that's happened so far. In those few words, we find a man who's doing right. He is honoring God. He is serving God. He is in the will of God. To me, it says something very important. Samson didn't mess up all at once. He didn't mess up in a few weeks or in a few months. He took small steps toward big destruction. It's the same way I feel about what has happened in our economy over the last 10 years. When big businesses failed, it wasn't because of one big bad business decision. It was because of small decisions over time that led to the collapse and fall and the recession and everything that went along with it. I don't believe that the CEO of a big company wakes up one morning and announces, "Ladies and gentlemen, I've decided that we're going to rip off all of our company stockholders and all of our customers." That's a big, bad decision all at once. Nobody, I think, wakes up and does that. I think even some of the worst CEOs don't do that. I think it's a bunch of small things that happen. One morning he receives a report on his desk that shows some of the company's investments have failed. He tells a little white lie at the next meeting and says, "Oh, things are fine," and yet he knows they're not. One small, bad decision. In his heart, he hopes things will recover. He's not a bad person, but things don't recover. So the next time a report like that shows up on his desk, he fires the person who wrote the report because he doesn't want word to get out that things are bad. Another small, bad decision. Each of these small, bad decisions slowly bring him down until he's sitting in a prison cell. Not one big bad decision, a bunch of small decisions. And that's Samson, a bunch of small decisions. So 20 years go by, and what happens? One small step. One day Samson went to Gaza, where he saw a prostitute. He went in to spend the night with her. Oh, Samson. 20 years, you're doing fine. And what do? Gaza was the headquarters of the Philistines. Gaza was 25 miles from Samson's home. And again, the Philistines quickly discovered where Samson was and what he was doing. Remember, he's like the president of the Israelites. So Samson walks into town, people know about it. Samson goes to a prostitute, people know about it. The TMZ of the Philistines was probably every man on every corner who repeated it to the next person, to the next person, to the next person. Soon everybody in town was aware of where Samson was and what Samson was doing. So they surrounded the home where Samson's staying. They locked the gates of the city and decide to kill him right there the next morning. But Samson, as he usually does, manages to slip out. At midnight, he decides to leave. He discovers the city gates locked. So what does he do? He picks up the city gates and the posts that hold the city gates in place and walks off with them and throws them on a mountain nearby. That's Samson. Everyone knew about Samson's strength, and this was just another demonstration of how strong he was. Small steps to big destruction. Now think about what Samson did. You might be wondering, why would Samson sacrifice everything for so little? The sad thing is, we do it ourselves all the time. Whether it's cheating on a test for an easy A, lying on our tax forms to get a bigger refund, or going over the speed limit to get somewhere faster. We all do it. We are all willing to so easily sacrifice for something that makes us feel good, or look good, or get there faster, or make ourselves feel better because we're getting something out of it. Most people aren't out there trying to mess up their lives. I can show you major turning points in my life that happened because somebody from the outside says, one big thing happened. And I would say to you, no, many small things led up to that one big thing. We don't plan to fail. We don't plan to come up short. We don't plan to end up in a mess. It happens one step at a time. Samson almost married a Philistine woman against his parents' advice and out of the will of God. She ends up dead and Samson is disgraced. He's forgiven by God, and for 20 years Israel lives in peace. Then he walks those 25 miles to Gaza to see a prostitute. One small bad decision. So what's next? Another small step, and that small step has a name. And her name is Delilah. Small steps lead to big destruction. Sometime later, he fell in love with a woman in the valley of Sorek whose name was Delilah. The rulers of the Philistines went to her and said, "See if you can lure him into showing you the secret of his great strength and how we can overpower him so that we may tie him up and subdue him. Each one of us will give you 1,100 shekels of silver." Money, money, money. We don't know, and we're not really told whether Delilah truly loved Samson. We do know one thing about Delilah, though. She was willing to take a bribe. She was willing to sacrifice, if she did love him, for money. Now we find this part of the story in Judges 16:6-14, but I'm going to give you the Reader's Digest version here. Delilah says, "Tell me the secret of your strength." And Samson tells a lie. He says, "If you get 7 bowstrings and you tie me up with those, I'll become as weak as any other man." And so he goes to sleep and they tie him up with those 7 bowstrings. And then she says, "Samson, Samson, the Philistines are here." Samson breaks free and Delilah's angry. "You've made a fool of me. Please tell me your secret." He says, "Well, it's ropes, brand new ropes. That's how you can hold me down. Ropes. Tie me up with them and I'll be as weak as any other man." So he goes to sleep and they tie him up with those new ropes, and what does she do? She goes, "Samson, Samson, the Philistines are here." And guess what? He breaks through those ropes. And Delilah at this point is getting a little irritated. She wants the money. She goes, "You lied to me again. Tell me the real reason for your strength." And here he says something that's very close to the truth, but not quite. He says, okay, it's my hair. He says, "If you take my braids and you weave them into a fabric on a loom and tie them with a pin, I'll be as weak as any man." This gets very elaborate here. So he's going to making it sound like, oh, it's got to be something really special here. So tie them into a loom, weave them into a loom, into fabric, and then I'll be weak. So this is what happens next. He breaks free. Again, he breaks free. She says to him, "How can you say I love you when you won't confide in me. Oh, how can you say I love you when you won't confide in me? This is the third time you've made a fool of me and haven't told me the secret of your great strength. With such nagging, she prodded him day after day until he was sick to death of it. Samson, the man who could rip city gates down, poles and all. Samson, the man who could kill 1,000 men with the jawbone of a donkey. Samson, the man who could lead the Israelites for 20 years in peace. Samson, the man who couldn't say no to his pride, his Samson sickness, to the small sins, gives in to Delilah. So he told her everything. He says that he's a Nazirite, and he was set apart from birth. He admits that he has never cut his hair. His hair has never been cut because he is a Nazirite, set apart from God since birth. After putting him to sleep on her lap, she called for someone to shave off the 7 braids of his hair, and so began to subdue him, and his strength left him. It wasn't that the strength was in his hair. That's something that I misunderstood as a Sunday school student many, many years back as a child. I understood Samson's strength. Everything was in his hair. His hair was the symbol of his commitment to God, and that symbol was now gone. He cut off his relationship with God when he allowed his hair to be cut. And truly, he made that decision. When he told Delilah about his vow, he made that decision. We might say, oh, it was the Philistines that did it to him. No, Samson did it to himself. Then the Philistines seized him, gouged out his eyes, and took him down to Gaza. Binding him with bronze shackles, they set him to grinding grain in the prison. 56,250. I said at the beginning that this number was important. When Samson chose to visit that prostitute in Gaza after the 20 years of peace, he walked 25 miles. That's 56,250 steps. 56,250 opportunities to stop and go the other way. 56,250 opportunities to think about what he was doing. Each was a small step to destruction. The lesson is obvious. Temptation is everywhere, even in the small things. When we give into temptation, we give into one of those small steps. Each of those ends up being a big number, like 56,250. It becomes a big number because we have taken all those steps toward destruction. They allow us to rationalize, explain, and pride tells us that we're doing fine. Samson assumed that he could disobey God and it would never catch up with him. But it didn't happen all at once. He did it in 56,250 little steps.